in his re-election campaign?
I've never, not in my experience, I've never seen that before.
In June 2022, Justice Department career lawyers testified. They actually testified before the House about how Trump political appointees intervened in criminal and antitrust cases to advance the personal interests of President Trump. What do you think it says about the severity of the politicizing of the Justice Department that two career DOJ lawyers came forward to testify about it before Congress, and all four career prosecutors made the extraordinary move of withdrawing from the Roger Stone case?
As I've said, Senator, career prosecutors don't walk away from cases that they believe in and cases that they've spent a lot of time and effort trying to move forward. So when you have any member of the Department of Justice who feels compelled to resign from a case or from the department for ethical reasons, that's a very concerning thing. When you have four on one case resign, I think it's the sort of thing that we can't possibly ignore.
Is quite extraordinary, and I would like at this point to commend all of the career DOJ people, including, of course, all the people at the FBI, for doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing and not making political decisions. Now, we know that hate crimes against the AAPI community has gone up, and especially with the president calling the virus the China virus, the Wuhan virus, and members of his administration have also referred to it as Kung flu. So there has been documented increase in hate crimes against AAPI communities. Given your extensive experience at the FBI, do you think the FBI and Justice Department are doing enough to address hate crimes in our country, including against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders? And do you know of any prosecution by the DOJ on any of these hate crimes?
I'm not aware of recent prosecutions of hate crimes. Again, I don't have access to all of the information that the FBI or DOJ has, and so I can't speak to whether they're doing that work or not. It certainly seems that those sort of incidents, just from what I hear in open source reporting, seem to be on the rise, and I would expect that the Bureau and DOJ should be looking at those things very closely.
I should hope so, because so far I don't know of any indictments coming down on these kinds of cases. I believe my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McCabe.
Thank you very much, Senator. I think we have Senator Hawley on the line, but I got just a real brief inquiry here. Mr. McCabe, what is a defensive briefing?
A defensive briefing is typically when we reach out to an individual who we think might be the subject of some sort of malign activity from a foreign government or a foreign power, and try to make them aware of the threats that they might come across.
An example would be, I think Senator Feinstein had a staff member that was suspected of being connected to the Chinese intelligence community, and she was briefed about that. Is that correct? Would that be an example?
That sounds like the sort of information or a sort of situation in which we would give a defense brief.
And she took corrective action by dismissing that person. Was there ever a defensive briefing given to Hillary Clinton about concerns about her campaign being reached out to or interfered regarding foreign actors?
I'm not sure, Senator. I saw some of the documents on the committee's website seem to indicate that, but I don't have an independent recollection of that briefing.
Well, I can just assure you that she was. There was a suspicion that a foreign government may have been trying to aid her campaign. She was briefed about it. Counterintelligence investigations are designed to protect entities from foreign influence. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Counterintelligence investigations are designed to protect American interests against foreign influence. Is that correct?
That's right. Counterintelligence investigations are designed to mitigate threats to national security.
So like Senator Feinstein could fire somebody that was on her staff to mitigate it. Is that a good example?
That could certainly be one way to mitigate a threat.
At any time, during the multiple counterintelligence investigations that were conducted against Trump campaign officials, was there ever a defensive briefing given to President Trump about the concerns you had about Mr. Papadopoulos, Carter Page, or anyone else, including General Flynn?
Not that I'm aware of.
Why?
Well, Senator, we typically don't provide defensive briefings when we feel that they could run the risk of compromising the investigations that we're undertaking. So before we provide a briefing, we try to determine whether or not that briefing will ultimately get communicated back to the target or somehow obstruct our ability to shed some light on whether or not there's actually a threat to national security.
So when it came to Papadopoulos, you never told the Trump campaign you may have a problem with him?
That's correct.
And when it comes to Carter Page, you never sat down with President Trump, we got concerns about Carter Page?
I do not believe that happened.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by saying that I heard, I think, my Democrat colleagues wondering aloud why it is that we're here today. And I have to say, I would have thought that would have been obvious by now, that we're here because we're looking at maybe the biggest scandal in the history of the FBI. We're looking at the use of the FBI to interfere in a presidential election. We're looking at the use of the FBI to lie to the FISA court, to so misrepresent facts, statements, and other material to this court that the court had to issue a statement saying that they could not trust the FBI, not only in this case, but in potentially every other case going forward. Absolutely unbelievable, unprecedented for a court to issue a rebuke of this nature. And I have to say, the fact that my Democrat colleagues wanted to shrug and move on in the face of this kind of interference, this kind of inappropriate behavior, this abuse of power, which is what it is really extraordinary. And of course, the individual we have before us today has an entire report written by the IG about how he lied repeatedly. And so that's why we're here. And by the way, now that we're in the middle of another election, the outcome of which is still disputed and unknown, and people are wondering, why is it that so many Americans don't have trust in the electoral process? This is why they don't have trust in the electoral process. This is why. It's because we've seen instance after instance of the abuse of the institutions of this country to try to interfere with the voice and the will of we the people. And we're looking at it today. That's what this is about. If anybody's has any question, that's what this is about. Now let's talk a little bit about that lying to the FISA court, which the FBI did repeatedly and DOJ signed off on. Mr. McCabe, let me come to you now. You know, I've had something of a personal quest here to try to find somebody who will take some responsibility for these warrants that they signed off on, for these applications that they personally signed off on. You signed off on a renewal application for the Carter Page FISA warrant on June 28, 2017. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, by January of 2017, the FBI had identified and interviewed Christopher Steele's primary subsource. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And those interviews cast serious doubts on the accuracy of the Steele dossier, to put it mildly. Isn't that correct?
I know that now, yes.
The FISA renewal application that you signed, however, did not acknowledge any of those facts. Isn't that correct?
The FISA package that I signed contained the same, contained the errors that are laid out in the IG report.
And by December of 2016, so this is months before the renewal application, the Crossfire Hurricane team knew that the primary subsource of the Steele dossier was suspected of being a Russian asset. Isn't that correct?
I don't believe that's correct. No, I don't know that to be the case.
So your testimony under oath is that the Crossfire Hurricane did not know that the primary subsource was potentially a Russian agent as of December 2016?
I can't tell you what the members of the team thought about the primary subsource in December of 2016. If you're referring to the recent footnote from the FISA report that was declassified by the Attorney General, then no, I don't know that they knew that then. I can't say what they knew.
The FISA application that you signed contained none of this, though, correct? It contained no new disclosures to the court. It contained none of the information that the FBI absolutely knew of. It contained nothing to give the court any pause about anything that you previously certified. Isn't that correct?
Well, I think you need to be, we should be specific about
No.
what
Just answer my question. Did the application that you personally signed, did it disclose the interviews back from January of 2017 that you just said that you were aware of, that the FBI was aware of? The OIG report details this at pages 187, 188, and 189 of his report. You can go look it up. He's had a lot to say about you. You can go look up that IG report. They say that the FBI knew of the problems with the primary, this Christopher Steele's primary subsource, and did not disclose it to the court. Isn't that correct? Yes or no?
The IG report, is my understanding, sir, details 17 errors that were present in the package that you're referring to.
Answer my question. Did the report that you personally signed, did it disclose the FBI's interviews in January of 2017? You signed a new application in June of 2017. Did it disclose the interviews casting serious doubt on the primary subsource? Yes or no? We both know the answer is no, but why don't you just say it? What? No, right?
It did not disclose serious concerns with the primary subsource.
Why didn't it? Why didn't you notify the court of this new information? Is it because you wanted to continue to undermine the election of Donald Trump? Let me ask you this. Didn't you send a text message on June 24, 2016 saying that I hope the Brexit vote doesn't predict a similar outcome here in November?
Okay, so I'd like to answer that. I'd like to answer your question, sir, but I'm going to need a little bit of space to get in a complete answer.
Why did you answer that question? Why did you send that text message?
I am, sir, as you know, I have not been able to review my text. I do not have my text in front of me here. I requested access to my materials, was denied that access. So I'm not prepared to answer your questions based on my text messages.
Oh, you don't recall them or you deny? Here's what it says, quote, I hope it, meaning the Brexit vote, doesn't predict a similar outcome here in November, end quote, June 24, 2016. Do you deny sending that message?
I don't know, sir. I haven't seen any of those text messages in over 4 years, and I'd like to be able to continue to, I'd like to give you a complete answer, but I'm having a hard time. When you speak over me, it cuts off my ability to respond.
Well, why don't you answer my question? Do you have no memory of that text message? Is that what you're saying, of June 24, 2016?
Sir, I don't remember text messages I sent in 2016 that I haven't seen since then. So yes, I don't have a recollection of text messages from 4 years ago. That's correct.
Yeah, very convenient. I noticed that everybody who comes—
It would be much less convenient. It would have been really convenient to be able to review those materials before today.
Memory lapses, including you, Mr. McCabe. It's really extraordinary. Really extraordinary. Let me ask you about this text message. Peter Strzok sent this to Lisa Page on August 15, 2016. I want to believe the path that you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that's you, that there's no way he gets elected, that's Trump. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. I'd like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Why were you talking about the likely outcome of an election with two line agents who were working on a case, the Carter Page investigation at that time involving the president? Don't you think it's inappropriate?
I think your question is, the premise of your question is not accurate. I don't recollect ever talking to Peter Strzok or Lisa Page, only one of whom is an agent in the FBI, about the election or about that conversation that is referenced in their text message, which I was not a part of.
Okay, so you're saying that didn't happen? You deny that happened?
I don't recall that ever happening.
Just before we leave the FISA warrant application that you signed, the renewal application, how is it that the court was so deliberately and disastrously misled such that it had to issue a public rebuke at the FBI? Do you take responsibility?
I disagree with your characterization that the court was deliberately misled.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, that's correct.
Do you think it was just an accident?
I think that there were numerous and objectionable errors and omissions in that package, but
Do you
I
think
don't
that the
think where-
falsification of an email, do you think the falsification of the email to the FISA court was an accident?
Senator, I am not aware of, Mr. Kleinsmith's activities I was not aware of until I read the IG report. I know that he has taken responsibility for those representations, and I understand that. The errors and omissions in that package, other than Mr. Kleinsmith's admitted activities over the report from the CIA, I do not know any of those other errors to have been proven to be intentional acts.
Senator.
Right. Okay, so we've established that.
Senator Hawley, your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCabe, thank you for being with us today, listening to you, just answering Senator Hawley's question. It reminded me that you are spending a lot of your time on CNN these days, and of course, this is not a debate on CNN. This is a hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I have to say, when did you go to CNN?
I'm sorry, was that a question of when
Yeah,
began?
well, I'll answer it for you. Was it in August? Was it in 2019? I think that may be right. I think you're pretty lucky.
It might be. I don't remember the exact dates.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm sorry. I don't remember the exact date, Senator. But that sounds about right.
Right. Yeah, I think you're pretty lucky to have landed a job pretty much anywhere after having been fired from the FBI, and I think that the IG publicly flogging you in his report, and the AG fired you a month later, and that was a pretty sad demise, I guess, of your career in public service. And you were set to retire at the tender young age of 49. Isn't that correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
That's not correct.
What is correct?
FBI agents become eligible to retire when they reach age 50.
Okay. All right. And you've got a lawsuit against the federal government now claiming that you had a record of unblemished and nonpartisan public service, and you're demanding that the court reinstate your employment as Deputy Director of the FBI and pay you your full pension. Is that correct?
That sounds correct, ma'am, but I'll let the legal papers speak for themselves.
Let me ask you this. Listening to you today and having read some of the things around your career, how did you get caught up in such a web of deceit and obstruction and cover-up? And is this culture standard operating procedure at the FBI?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the point of your question, but I also
point
don't
of my
agree with the
question is this.
characterization
I'll
of
help
the
you with
culture
it.
at the FBI.
Let me help you with that. You didn't want to answer Senator Cruz's questions about corruption, and I can understand why. But what you have to understand, that as overconfident as you all were in the plot that you were carrying out at the FBI, in your government job paid for by taxpayer dollars, you all had created this web and culture of corruption and cover-up and obstruction, and you thought that you could do it. You thought you would be able to get by with it, but you got caught. You've said today that you wish you could reconsider your decision requesting the FISA warrant on Carter Page and whether or not Director Comey should have held the press conference on Hillary Clinton. And listening to your answers, I think I have never heard of an action. Every criminal I have heard in a case, they generally will say they wish they hadn't committed the crime, or that someone who has done something wrong wishes they had not done that wrong. So you took these actions. You've been called out by the IG and the AG. Why shouldn't you be prosecuted for your actions?
Senator, first of all, there was absolutely no plot or scheme or conspiracy between myself or any of the folks that I worked with in the work that you've referred to, okay? Secondly, I'm not aware of a single, other than Mr. Kleinsmith's admissions, I am not aware of a single act or even an allegation against anyone who was involved in these cases
Was the IG wrong?
Committed a crime.
Was the IG wrong?
I'd like to finish my answer, Senator.
Well, it's my time, and I've only got 2 minutes left. How long have you known Christopher Steele?
I do not know Christopher Steele.
I think you've known him about 2 decades, right? How long has Bruce Orr known Christopher Steele?
To be clear, Senator, I don't know Christopher Steele. I've never met Christopher Steele, so that's not correct. And I can't tell you how long Bruce Orr has known Christopher Steele.
Okay. The exculpatory information on the Crossfire Hurricane, on Carter Page's recorded conversations, and that was not disclosed. What are the consequences under the FBI rules for when an FBI agent lies or otherwise misleads a federal court?
So the failure to disclose the Carter Page information is not as far as I'm aware, was not determined to be a deliberate misrepresentation to the court. So to answer your question about misrepresentations to the court, generally, FBI people would be disciplined in the same way anyone in the judicial system would if they were found to have deliberately and intentionally misled the court.
So you feel like no one did anything wrong?
I am simply following the findings of the Inspector General, which documented Mr. Kleinsmith's intentional acts, but failed to find any evidence, documentary or testimonial, to indicate that the other mistakes in the FISA package were the result of intentional misconduct.
Do you think you were wrongly fired?
Yes. Yes, I do think I was wrongly fired.
And
yes.
You think you did nothing wrong?
That's correct.
Even though the IG pointed out that you did, and even though you all had a culture of corruption and cover-up, that you thought it was okay to spy on Carter Page, it was okay to mislead Michael Flynn. This is a sad state of affairs, and I am pleased that you are no longer a part of the FBI.
Senator, I'd like to answer those allegations.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so no, I categorically refuse to agree with your assertions. No one that I am aware of in the FBI conducted any activity that should leave them susceptible to criminal prosecution, certainly including myself, as someone who's now been the subject of investigative activity for years, for no baseless, the subject of a baseless investigation conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for almost 2 years, which concluded in a dismissal of their case. So no, I don't believe that I committed any crime. I know I never committed any crime working for the FBI. And yes, I believe that the conclusions in the IG's report were baseless. I believe it was a flawed and misleading and deeply unfair investigation that led to my unfair termination.
Well, if you know nothing about what was done, and Yates and Rosenstein and Comey all said they knew nothing about any of this, how in the world did it get so far off track? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Kennedy next, but this is an important point. If somebody knew that the dossier was unreliable, do they have a duty to report to the system the information they found?
I think that's true. Yes.
Okay. Is it fair to fire somebody who knew and failed to report?
Well, it would depend, I guess, on the circumstances of where and how that happened. But
Well,
it
see,
certainly seems that could be the result.
Yeah, Mr. McCabe, here's the problem. The problem is that by June of 2016, it was pretty clear that the document, the dossier, was no longer reliable, that multiple stop signs had been run, that the CIA is suggesting that maybe Hillary Clinton signed off a plan to cook this whole thing up. She was defensively briefed, Trump never was, and the fact that this information was gathered in January and March, the stunning to now know that the subsource disavowed the document that was used to get a warrant, and nobody at the top had any idea that that occurred, is just earth-shatteringly disappointing. Do you understand how people could be disappointed in that?
I do understand how people could be disappointed in that, sir. I'm disappointed in it myself.
Yeah. And the point is, after a while, Mr. McCabe, it gets to be hard to reconcile all of this and come out and say that there was is it still your testimony that the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign were equally treated when it came to allegations?
I think that the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign were treated very differently in the context of two very different investigations.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it seems to me that allegations were made by both, and I'll sum that all up. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCabe, who is responsible for the misbehavior outlined by Inspector General Horowitz in his report about Misfire Hurricane?
Well, it depends on what you're referring to, Senator. If you're referring to the intentional misconduct committed by Mr. Kleinsmith, quite obviously Mr. Kleinsmith's responsible for that. I think from a command perspective, Director Comey and myself and our subordinate leaders are all responsible for the failures in that package that were allowed to go forward. But if you're asking me who is responsible for intentional misconduct beyond Mr. Kleinsmith's activity, I'm not aware that there's been a finding that others were engaged in intentional misconduct.
While you were either director or acting director of the FBI decided to investigate two presidential campaigns. One, Secretary Clinton, the other one, then candidate Trump, and later President Trump. I want to put aside Secretary Clinton for a second. When the FBI decided to investigate candidate Donald Trump, what questions did you ask? I mean, at some point somebody came to you and said, hey, Mr. Deputy Director, we're going to, just so you'll know, we're going to investigate the Republican nominee for President of the United States. You remember when you were told that?
So if you're referring to our initiation of the Crossfire investigation, so the investigation of the Trump campaign, I do remember conversations at the end of July 2016.
Okay, I'm not interested in the date. Excuse me for interrupting. I apologize. Would it be fair to say that the Christopher Steele dossier was the keystone of the investigation?
No, sir, that's not accurate.
Oh, well, how important was it? What word would you use?
It had no importance. We were not in possession of that information when we initiated the case.
Okay, so Christopher Steele's dossier had nothing to do with your decision to go forward.
That's correct.
That's your testimony today, under oath.
It is.
Okay. At some point, the Christopher Steele dossier became important, did it not?
The Christopher Steele reporting came to us in the middle of September, and it became important to us at that time.
Okay. Now, when you heard about the Christopher Steele dossier, did you ask to interview Mr. Steele? I mean, you're only investigating a candidate for president of the United States after you've already investigated one. Now you're on the second one. Did you say, hey, I'm the deputy director here. I'm responsible. I want to talk to Christopher Steele. Did you do that?
I did not personally speak to Mr. Steele, but our investigative team traveled overseas.
Why not? You're the deputy. This is what I don't understand about this whole thing, Mr. McCabe. You're the deputy director of the FBI. And your people have decided to investigate the Republican nominee for President of the United States after already investigating the Democratic nominee. And at least in part, at some point, it was based on the Chris Steele dossier. Now, you can run from that one, but you can't hide from it. Did you ever call your guys in, or gals, and say, hey, just a thought, I think I'd like to talk to Chris Steele to see how credible this guy is, because you say you've never known him. Did you do that?
Senator, in my entire experience of 21 years as an FBI agent, I am not aware of a single instance of the deputy director of the FBI interviewing a source. And
well, how many nominees for president of the United States have you investigated?
I can't comment on that, sir.
Now, but you're telling me at no point you ever sat down and said, wait a minute, guys, this is now all based or substantially based on Chris Steele. I want to talk to this. I want to talk to this cowboy. You never did that.
That is not an accurate characterization of our investigation.
That's what you just said. You said you never talked to him. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, sir, I'm just trying to clarify that the Steele information didn't come to us until 2.5 months after we'd opened the case.
Well, when it came to you, did you say, wait a minute, guys, this is my reputation on the line. I want to talk to Christopher Steele.
No, Senator, I sent my investigators to conduct the investigation.
Okay. Do you know who? Do you know who Igor Danchenko is?
I do not.
You have no idea who that is, even today.
I am not going to speculate as to who he is.
Well, he was the subsource that the Steele dossier was based on. So
Senator,
you're telling, I want to be sure I understand. You're the assistant director of the FBI. You've decided to investigate the Trump campaign. You get this dossier, which, whether you admit it or not, was the basis for all the FISA warrants. You never sat down and said, I want to talk to Chris Steele. If you had talked to Chris Steele, you would have found out that his subsource was Igor Danchenko. That was his primary subsource. Danchenko was not, he wasn't from Russia. He was some guy in Washington, D.C. working for Brookings. He went to the University of Louisville. He went to Georgetown. He was buddies with Dr. Fiona Hill. He was relying on his drinking buddies. Why didn't all of you folks who are running this show say, wait a minute, this is all centered around Chris Steele. We better talk to Chris Steele, and we better talk to this guy Danchenko.
Senator, it's important that I get this out. So if you could give me just a second.
Sure.
I am not sure that I have now read the report of the subsource interview, and the interviewee's name is still redacted in that report. So I do not feel comfortable acknowledging or confirming or denying any identity that might be associated with that person.
His own lawyers said it was him.
Here's what it looks like to the American people, Mr. McCabe. The FBI didn't even try here, the people making the decisions. You wanted to investigate Trump. I mean, this is a nominee for President of the United States. You've already investigated the other one and potentially screwed up her campaign. And so you get the Steele dossier. You don't sit down, you personally, and Comey, you don't talk to Chris Steele. You don't even ask questions about where he got his information. Had you done that, you would have found that he got it from Danchenko. Danchenko's a jellyhead. Okay, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And it all would have come apart. But you never looked. And it sort of looks like you didn't want to.
Is that a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I can't possibly disagree more strongly with the way you framed that question. That while it is true that I never sat personally with Mr. Steele or any of his alleged sources, our team spent a great deal of effort interviewing him, interviewing other people that they thought were relevant, and trying to get to the bottom of the material that he provided. So no, we were not predisposed to investigating the president. It wasn't something we sought out to do, but we felt that the potential national security threat put us in a position where we were obligated to investigate. That's what we did.
And you expect the American people to believe that?
That is the truth, and I certainly hope they believe it.
General Flynn's been prosecuted for lying to the FBI. You lied to the FBI, and you aren't being prosecuted. Don't you think that sends the wrong message to the American people?
Senator, General Flynn's situation and mine have absolutely nothing in common. I never, ever intentionally misled the FBI or the IG under any circumstances. And I think that's probably the conclusion that the DC U.S. Attorney's Office came to when they dismissed the 2-year investigation of me.
But you weren't fired for parking in the handicapped parking spot at the FBI, were you? You were fired for lying, were you not?
I was fired as the result of a deeply unfair and flawed IG investigation, and I am challenging that termination in federal court.
Okay. Last question. Do you have any idea, Mr. McCabe? I don't think Mr. Comey does. Do you have any idea how badly you and your colleagues have hurt the FBI? I mean, the premier law enforcement agency in all of human history. And it was just a handful of you. And now when the average American gets a knock on his or her door, FBI, I need to talk to you. At least half of them are thinking, oh my gosh, is the agent a Republican or a Democrat? They probably know my party affiliation. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done?
Sir, my colleagues and I never took any action to undermine our effectiveness, undermine our oath to this Constitution and the American people and the work that we did for the FBI. I deeply regret how politicized the FBI has become in light of the rhetoric and the relentless attacks levied upon it over the last 4 years. And I have great faith that my former colleagues will continue to do their work and ignore those sort of baseless attacks.
Well, at best, what you and Mr. Comey and the others did, at worst, it was intentional. And I don't know what's in your head or your heart, but I can tell you what it looked like to the American people, at the very minimum. An incompetence tsunami. And they're thinking, how did these guys make it through the birth canal? Yeah. That's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just to put a fine point on this, and we'll let you go, Ms. McCabe. Thank you for coming. Did you have regular meetings with the people in charge of Crossfire Hurricane?
We had regular meetings, we had impromptu meetings, or a lot of meetings.
You took it seriously, is that correct?
I think everybody took it seriously.
Okay. So was Peter Strzok your main source of information?
Peter Strzok was one of many sources of information. I met very regularly with Mr. Steinbach, Mr. Priestep, our general counsel, deputy general counsel. There were quite a few people involved at that level.
Did they tell you that the subsource was being interviewed in January?
I did know that the subsource had been interviewed. That's correct.
Did you ever ask the question, how did that interview go? Did it help us with the warrant application? Did it undermine the warrant application? Did you ask any questions about the results of the interview?
I did. I remember discussing it very briefly, and I was not informed of any concerns significant concerns with the things that the witness told them.
Who did you talk to about the interview? Do you recall?
I do not recall, sir.
So you remember being told about were you told about the March interview?
No, sir.
So here's the question, I guess. If you ask them, how did the interview go, and nobody tells you that it basically destroyed the dossier, if that's not criminal, is it grossly negligent not to get that information to you?
I think that the case team should have had much more detailed conversation within themselves and also with the department attorneys who are writing the FISA.
Is the blame?
Senator, I think the information that they included in the FISA package about that interview, albeit wildly misleading, I think it reflects how they thought about the interview at that time. And I think they didn't think about it critically enough.
If you look at this interview and you're not wowed by how unreliable the dossier is, you don't want to see it as being unreliable. Now, you're in charge, the number 2 guy, of one of the most consequential investigations in the history of the FBI. It begins to fall apart. One stop sign after another is presented to the FBI. The CIA tells the FBI that this is internet rumor. You need to watch Christopher Steele. The State Department talks about him trying to take Trump down. Bruce Orr talks about you need to watch this guy. When the subsource is actually interviewed, he shreds the document as being reliable, and nothing seemed to work when it came to making sure that the true facts got out to the court and others. Nothing seemed to work. Can you give me an explanation as to why, when it came to the exculpatory part of this, nothing seemed to work the way it should?
Senator, I can only rely on the findings I've read in the IG report.
But you were the number 2 guy. You were in charge of all this. How is it possible that the number 2 guy in the FBI was not informed about these major breakdowns regarding the reliability of the dossier? Were you not informed about the email from the CIA saying, yeah, actually, Carter Page, he was a source for us?
Senator, I can't answer for you why I did not know something at the time.
Okay, well,
I can't comment on it.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the hearing. The purpose of the hearing is to make sure that we find answers to how the system failed so it doesn't fail again. And I appreciate you coming. I'm sorry I didn't give you a break. And we will continue, in spite of my Democratic colleagues' protestations. We're going to find somebody accountable for something when it comes to Crossfire Hurricane. And thank you very much, Mr. McCabe, for participating in the hearing. I appreciate it very, very much and wish you the best.
Thank you.
All right, now as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just astonishing to me that so much was ignored so often, and you come to the conclusion there is no there. So what do we know? We know that no defensive briefing was given to President Trump about concerns regarding his campaign, but when there were concerns regarding the Clinton campaign and foreign influence, she was briefed. We know that Senator Feinstein was briefed when the FBI thought maybe a member of her staff was connected to the Chinese intelligence community. All of these investigations of the Trump campaign were counterintelligence investigations. Not one mentioned to President Trump, you may have a problem with Papadopoulos. Well, if you look at the transcripts of the bar talk with Mr. Papadopoulos, he says in the transcripts, he didn't even know he was being recorded, that no, he's not working with the Russians. He hasn't received any information from Russia. That would be treason. That would be a crime. The whole premise of Crossfire Hurricane was a report by an Australian ambassador to the United Kingdom that was given to somebody in our office in London. That makes its way back to Washington. They've got all this information where Papadopoulos denies working with Russians, and they just plow ahead. Compare that to the September CIA memo to the FBI suggesting that Hillary Clinton has signed off on a plan to link Trump to Russia to draw attention away from her email server problem. This is our CIA telling the FBI they have credible information, an investigative lead, that Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee, is trying to link Trump to Russia for political purposes, and the FBI completely ignored it. Apparently it threw it in the garbage can and considered an Australian ambassador meeting in a bar more reliable, didn't give it 1 minute of attention. And the reason that's important, it begins to explain how this all happened. Christopher Steele was on the payroll of Fusion GPS, who was on the payroll of the Democratic Party. Christopher Steele was working for the Democratic Party. He provided a dossier that used a Russian source who was suspected of being a Russian agent years before, and it turned out to be a bunch of garbage. So the reason the FBI should have looked at what the CIA had told them is it begins to make Crossfire Hurricane make more sense. That this whole thing was cooked up in July. That the whole idea of Trump-Russia connections were not real. They were manufactured in part by Christopher Steele. And the FBI bought it hook, line, and sinker. So I think a lot of us on our side are just astonished that when the CIA sends over information to the FBI, that they have intelligence that Hillary Clinton signed off on a plan to connect Trump to Russia to divert attention from her, that nobody at the FBI did a damn thing about it. Well, who did they send it to? Peter Strzok. Are you going to have me believe that Peter Strzok was fair-minded when it came to Trump-Clinton? Doesn't it make a lot of sense that the person who hated Trump thought he should lose $100 million to nothing, thought he was an idiot, totally invested in making sure he never becomes president? Is it very far-fetched to say that when he got the information about Clinton, he just purposely did nothing with it? How do you explain a system this out of control? The most high-profile case maybe in the history of the FBI, at least near the top, that when the subsource is interviewed on 2 separate occasions and the information is damning to the dossier, it's exculpatory in nature, it never makes its way up to anybody who actually signed the warrant. What kind of oversight existed for this to happen? How serious were they about checks and balances? Why didn't they go to Trump and do for Trump what they did for Clinton? We think you may have a problem, you need to correct it. It's pretty obvious to us that Crossfire Hurricane started basically with a conversation in a bar. It took on a life well beyond what the evidence would require, that every time it was supposed to come to an end, it kept going. Every time they received some information that made the whole premise of the case unreliable, they ignored it. When it comes to General Flynn, in January the 4th, the professionals wanted to close out the case against General Flynn because there was no there. It was the 7th floor that kept it going. They tricked General Flynn into talking without a lawyer, without going to the White House. Sally Yates said they should have defensively briefed the president if they had a concern with General Flynn. They chose not to. They set him up and acted very dishonorably toward General Flynn. And there's nothing wrong with General Flynn talking to the ambassador of Russia when he's the incoming national security advisor. And the conversations are recorded, and there's not one word in there to suggest that General Flynn had been an agent of the Russians at any time. And they've basically tried to ruin the man's reputation. The professionals, January the 4th, took a hard look at General Flynn and found nothing there. It's just these people at the top who had an insane desire to keep looking at Trump people when the evidence would suggest they needed to stop. Why did they never stop when it came to Trump, when they should have stopped? Why did they never slow down? Because they had a bias. They really were in the tank when it came to Trump being a Russian agent. No matter what the evidence said, they were going after this guy. because in their mind he wasn't worthy. Why did they not look at the allegations against candidate Clinton provided by the CIA? It would undercut the narrative. This wasn't an investigation that was unbiased. This was an investigation that was out of control. The people in charge of it were deeply biased. Their actions proved more than any direct evidence of their bias. Every time they had a moment to reflect, they moved forward. Every time exculpatory information was provided, they ignored it or altered it criminally. It's no accident to the American. It's no accident, in my view, that all this happened. This is not a series of random mistakes. This was a concerted effort to keep an investigation going that should have stopped, that should have slowed down. And what's the damage done? They manipulated the FISA court to keep a warrant process going that should have stopped months ago. They created a cloud over the FBI about political bias that lingers to this day. Lawyers are being prosecuted for manipulating evidence to keep a warrant application alive. They were told about information from the CIA that maybe this was all part of a political scheme of the opponent. They ignored it. They knew that the Christopher Steele dossier was suspect. They knew that the source was a prior suspected Russian agent, and they kept going and going and going. And they never at one moment gave President Trump a briefing that every other candidate should expect. If you think somebody in my office is doing something wrong, I would like for you to tell me so I can fix it. They weren't trying to protect Trump. They weren't trying to protect his campaign from foreign influence. They were trying to undercut the president. They were trying to keep an investigation going against a president, a candidate they despised. They had one standard for Trump, vastly different than that of candidate Clinton. And my Democratic colleagues say, let's move on. To this day, years later, I've yet to find one person who will take responsibility for manipulating the FISA court. I didn't know. If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have signed it. So who are we to blame? Is it somebody at the bottom of the pyramid who had all this exculpatory information and for some reason didn't share it? Is that what the system's come down to? Blaming somebody at the bottom? They take responsibility in name only. They don't seem to appreciate the gravity of damage done to the FBI and to the investigative process when they say, no, of course I wouldn't have signed that warrant. These are the people, Comey and McCabe, not Rosenstein and Yates, who are actually in charge of gathering the information. They're in charge of the investigative part of obtaining a FISA warrant. They gather the facts, and the lawyers at DOJ decide whether or not to pursue a warrant. The people in charge of this investigation were notified by the CIA that this may have been a plot cooked up by the Democratic candidate to blame Trump for being involved in Russia when he wasn't. They completely ignored it. And when they were hit hard by the facts that the dossier was a bunch of garbage, it just magically never made it up to their desk. Everything bad about Trump made it to their desk. Everything exculpatory about the Trump campaign never made it to their desk. How dumb do they think we are? This committee is not through. We're going to keep digging until we find out how the most high-profile investigation of a candidate for president of the United States and eventually a sitting president was handled so poorly, and try to let the FISA court know that we take our job seriously. So we will continue this process. People need to be fired, and I think the criminality here needs to be looked at. I find it very difficult to believe that this exculpatory information was not withheld from the court on purpose. We know Kleinsmith changed exculpatory information. We caught him. There's somebody else out there that probably knows. The system rejected the exculpatory information. They just didn't ignore it. To be continued. Thank you. Hearing is adjourned.
All right, the 3-hour-plus hearing on the Senate Judiciary side does wrap up there. This was the fourth installment of this Crossfire Hurricane Senate Judiciary hearing, this time with Andrew McCabe as the lead witness right there. We continue to roll on right here on News Now from Fox. Hope everyone is having a great afternoon so far. Live look right now in Wilmington, Delaware, where any moment right now we are expecting the president-elect, Joe Biden, to be giving some remarks on Obamacare. We will be taking that for you in full once that gets going right here on News Now from Fox. In the meantime, everybody, I do want to show you, this one is making a lot of news already. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making some remarks, but what he said about President Trump's, quote, second term transition, that is getting a lot of people talking, especially there on Twitter. It's going viral right now. We already uploaded it to some of our sites there, and it's getting a lot of traction there as well. So we're going to keep you in double box right now while we do wait for Joe Biden.
United States foreign policy for the first time in America's history. Our efforts are gaining momentum. We're building. They're getting a momentum that is all their own. On November 16th and 17th, Poland will host the third ministerial to advance religious freedom or belief. This virtual event, on the heels of the 2018 and 2019 ministerials, which were hosted here in Washington, the State Department, are the largest human rights events ever held here at the State Department. Albania, Morocco, Taiwan, the United Arab Emirates, and Colombia have all held follow-on events as well. And the International Freedom or Belief Alliance that I launched in February of this year now has blossomed into 31 member states and growing. Next week, I'll have a very special opportunity to participate in a virtual Alliance Ministers meeting to solidify our plans for future action in the religious freedom space. You know, we're building out coalitions, too, that share our values in the economic sphere. In recent weeks, Undersecretary Keith Kroc has traveled to more than a dozen countries to bring freedom-loving countries and companies together in the Clean Network, a group that pledges to use only trusted vendors in their 5G networks. I'm happy to announce we have almost 50 clean countries today, representing nearly two-thirds of the world's GDP. 170 telephone companies, telcos, have agreed to be clean, and many of the world's leading companies are on board. It includes 27 of 30 NATO allies, 31 of 37 OECD members, 26 of 27 EU members, and 11 of 12 of the 3Cs nations. Undersecretary Keith Kroc is now down in South America. He's discussing the Clean Network with the government officials and private sector leaders in Brazil. And in fact, I got the news within the last hour that the government of Brazil supports the Clean Network principles, and I'm confident we'll sign an MOU in the very near future. I want to thank Brazil and its leadership for doing that. We're also standing alongside our Brazilian partners to protect the environment with the U.S.-Brazil Environmental Framework Dialogue that was held earlier today. The United States and Brazil are about real results when it comes to protecting the environment and growing our economies, not empty rhetoric. Undersecretary Kroc has also led the first ever Japan, U.S., Brazil trilateral exchange, which will advance democracy's ability to prosper together as sovereign and independent states. Talk about Asia for just a minute. I'm pleased to announce that on the 20th of this month, Undersecretary Kroc will lead our Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue with Taiwan under the auspices of the American Institute of Taiwan and the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office here in the United States. The dialogue signifies that our economic relationship with Taiwan, a vibrant democracy and a reliable partner, is strong and growing. Will help increase cooperation on everything from safe and secure supply chains to the clean and 5G security to health security and to more. Turning to another State Department bureau, building out coalitions of the like-minded. Last week, the Bureau of Energy Resources, under the leadership of Assistant Secretary Fannin, convened a virtual meeting of the Energy Research Governance Initiative. 20 countries attended, working for secure, resilient, diverse, and well-governed critical energy, mineral, and supply chains. And we're proud to participate in the 35th Annual Joint Economic Development Group meeting with Israel later this week. The Trump administration has exerted American leadership in unprecedented ways in multilateral institutions, too. Just as we helped protect the intellectual property rights by ensuring that the World Intellectual Property Organization is run by an individual who respects property rights. Last week, the United States helped ensure that the United Nations stewards its finances responsibly. I'm happy to report that an American with 40 years of administrative and budget experience will be placed in the UN system, having won a seat on the Advisory Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Questions. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a big deal. This advisory body shapes the UN's regular budget and its peacekeeping budget. It's nearly $10 billion a year, with more than $2 billion coming from the United States alone. Our diplomats made the case to our allies and partners on why having an American voice on this committee for the first time in an awfully long time is crucial to ensuring the money is spent responsibly. I want to congratulate Donna and Marie. American leadership also continues on the counterterrorism front. Today, the United States and Nigeria are co-hosting a virtual meeting with members of the global coalition focused on countering the threat of ISIS and its worldwide branches, including West Africa, and to supporting ongoing international efforts throughout the region. And in the Middle East, just last week, the United States sanctioned former Lebanese government minister Gibran Bassil under global Magnitsky authorities for his role in corruption. The Lebanese people clearly want their corrupt political class, so much of it beholden to Hezbollah, to stop ruining their country. Our action shows that American people stand with the Lebanese people as they call for their political leaders to chart a new direction marked by reforms, transparency, and honest governance. And on Iran, our efforts to protect the American people from the regime of Tehran will not cease. Today, the Treasury Department sanctioned an international network of companies and individuals that procured electronic components for a sanctioned Iranian military firm. I think it's clear by now that those who do business with Iran's military and proliferation-sensitive industries are risking the exact same punishment. In Europe, the United States welcomes the EU's adoption of guidelines for third state participation in permanent structured cooperation projects. Opening the door to U.S. participation in EU defense initiatives will strengthen NATO-EU cooperation, as well, and very importantly, interoperability. We look forward to completing an administrative arrangement with the European Defense Agency to ensure broad U.S. participation inside of PESCO. Closer to home, our prayers are with the people of the region as they recover and rebuild from Hurricane Ida's horrible devastation. The United States government is proud to have provided assistance already to our friends in Central America. We're proud to support Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, as these governments work together to address illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. We're very concerned that the Chinese IUU activity, this unregulated fishing, took place off the coast of Ecuador, as it has elsewhere in the world. I was with the Ecuadorian foreign minister. He and I both agree that this must stop. On Bolivia, President Trump was pleased to send a delegation headed by Treasury Undersecretary Brett McIntosh for the inauguration of President Luis Arce on November 8th. I also spoke to the president-elect last week to congratulate him on his historic victory. We also congratulate the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on their successful election last week, and we continue to seek similar free and fair elections in Venezuela and in Nicaragua. There's also plenty of news before I close on the human rights front. Yesterday, the State Department sanctioned 4 senior Chinese Communist Party officials and Hong Kong police who have undermined Hong Kong's promised autonomy and crushed the freedoms of its people. We will continue to challenge actions by the CCP and its Hong Kong proxies who stifle democracy and basic freedoms. On Monday, in Syria, we unleashed the 5th tranche of the Caesar Act designations on Bashar Assad and his regime, and the United States commends the EU for taking similar actions to sanction individuals responsible for prolonging the horrific conflict inside of Syria. We will continue to coordinate with our EU and like-minded partners to promote accountability for the regime there and the atrocities it has committed against the Syrian people. In Geneva yesterday, the United States presented our national report on the U.S. commitment to domestic human rights at the UN Universal Periodic Review. I'm very proud of the work we did. Our remarkable, vibrant democracy provides for the greatest freedoms and protection of human rights anywhere in the world. The brutal regimes shouting the loudest about our record have the most to hide about their abysmal treatment of their own people. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Rich? Mr. Secretary.
Hi.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right? We're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, successful today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful. I went through a transition on the front, and I've been on the other side of this. I'm very confident that we will do all the things that are necessary to make sure that the government, the United States government, will continue to perform its national security function as we go forward.
So you believe there's widespread voter fraud, that the reports that we're getting from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, showing vote totals in massive leads or significant leads with 99% reporting are going to be overturned, and that the United States failed to conduct a fraudulent free election?
Rich, I'm the Secretary of State. I'm getting calls from all across the world. These people are watching our election. They understand that we have a legal process. They understand that this takes time. Right? It took us 37 plus days in an election back in 2000. We conducted a successful transition then. I'm very confident that we will count, and we must count every legal vote. We must make sure that any vote that wasn't lawful ought not be counted. That dilutes your vote if it's done improperly. Got to get that right. When we get it right, we'll get it right. We're in good shape.
Should foreign leaders not be calling
We're good shape.
President-elect Biden?
Who is next?
I want to ask you.
I can barely hear you, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Hiba Nasser, Al-Sharq News. I want to ask about the sanctions against Gibran Bassil in Lebanon. We know that we heard that this was on the making for some time, but I want to ask about the timing. Are you were you doing this to make a new stage for the new administration? And also, I want to ask about the arms sale to UAE. When we expect that to be delivered?
So the second question was about the arms sales to the United Arab Emirates. So we'll have significant announcements with respect to that here very, very soon. We continue to review arms sales all across the world, including to our important friend and partner in the United Arab Emirates. We're confident we will be able to provide them weapon systems that will ensure their security and do the work that we all need to do collectively to counter the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Did you ask about Iranian sanctions earlier and the impact of those?
No, the sanctions against Gibran Bassil in Lebanon. Are you setting a new stage for the new administration? I want to ask about the timing, that's it.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question more broadly. No, the sanctions we put in place are because they're right and proper and will deliver good outcomes for the people in the country in which we sanction their leaders who are corrupt. That certainly holds true for Gibran Bassil. Right? This was someone who was deeply connected to a foreign terrorist organization, Hezbollah. We've now sanctioned him. The Lebanese people don't want to have anything to do with that. They want an independent nation. They want a sovereign country. They don't want the political elites that have been corrupted through the system that was put in place and permitted them to loot and rob their country. They want freedom. They want prosperity. They want jobs. Those are the things we want. The sanctions that we put in place against the former minister are appropriate and useful towards getting us closer to that one day where the Lebanese people can have what it is they so richly deserve.
Are we expecting a new sanctions?
Christina?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good. Is there any evidence that the CCP has interfered in the recent election or is trying to sow chaos in the aftermath of the legal challenges?
Was the question about Russia?
I'm sorry, CCP or any
Any foreign interference.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna leave that question to the Department of Homeland Security and to the Justice Department, the folks who deal with that. But as I think we all said prior to the election, we did an enormous amount of work to reduce the risk that they would have the capacity to have a significant capability to interfere in the elections themselves. And I'll leave the details of what they have determined so far about that for them to announce.